Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. The title of this particular episode of the podcast will be Husserlian Intersubjectivity and the Gazans. If you have been watching my podcasts for a while, then you know what I mean by Husserlian intersubjectivity. It is a process of connecting with the mind and the heart of others, whether of a single person or a collection of people. Intersubjectivity is preceded by what Edmund Husserl called bracketing or epiché. Bracketing means that you bracket or set aside all of the unessential parts of that person. So, for example, say that person belongs to a certain nationality or race or ethnicity or gender. Say that person comes from a certain social class. Say that person speaks a certain language, or say that person has a certain disability or is a certain age, and so on. Those are all externals, and they don't matter. And because they don't matter, they should be ignored. Now, does that mean that you totally reject those things? No. I mean, in other contexts, it may be important to consider each of them. For example, in discussing racism, it's obviously important to consider people and their particular race. When discussing sexism, obviously, it's important to consider the sex and gender that people belong to, and so on. So Husserl was not saying that you should never consider those things. Instead, what he was doing was proposing a new type of society, a society in which people related to each other between my own heart and the heart of the other, and my own mind and the mind of the other. And all of the superfluous things that really don't matter at that moment are simply thrown off to the side. And so, applied to the Gazans, or the Palestinians in general, I suppose. But since the Gazans have been considered so much because the war is going on directly against them, it's impacting other Palestinians as well, but not as much as the Gazans. And so my primary thought right now is about the Gazans. Indeed, I often think that I can't get the Gazans out of my mind, which should be obvious to anybody who watches the various episodes of this podcast, that almost every episode I do is about the Gazans. Almost every one, not every one, but almost every one. And that is a reflection of where my head is at. It's hard for me to think of anything else. Anything else seems kind of irrelevant, unimportant. Now, is that true? No, it's not true. There are certainly other things that are relevant and important, but that's the way it feels to me. right now. Given the way in which the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have been bragging in their videos. These are videos that they themselves have made and uploaded to social media sites like YouTube about how they have slaughtered families, how they have slaughtered children. And these IDF officers have big smiles on their face, which is one of the reasons that the World Court has said that it is considering not only bringing charges against Benjamin Netanyahu, but also against officers in the World Court. I think that is sensible. We'll see if it happens, and we'll see if it can be implemented and how it will be carried out. I don't know if these kinds of trials can be carried out in absence, because I think that inevitably that will be true in all or most cases. I don't see how Netanyahu will surrender himself and go to The Hague, nor do I see how the IDF officers will do the same. So if there is a trial or trials and multiple convictions, what will the penalties be? I don't know. There can be penalties announced, but whether those penalties can ever actually be applied to the people convicted of those crimes seems to me to be very doubtful. But it is because I have seen those videos of the IDF officers that my love, my heart, my heartfulness has been going out to the Gazans. How can anyone not feel empathy for the Gazans? As I was saying that, I realized I was making a mistake, and I admit that. I know that before 20 years ago, before I had my experience with Horia, the black-eyed maiden of white light, who woke me up from my sleep by bumping into my bed and saying, "Oh," that I had no empathy either. I had no idea what love was. I couldn't love anyone. I wanted to with all my heart, if I had a heart, but I really wanted to love other people, but it was beyond my capabilities. And so I probably should not say that everyone should be able to empathize because of the plague. And I apologize for calling it a plague, because I know some people who are in that neurodiversity movement see it as a different way of living and not as a malicious plague. That is up to them. That is their decision, not mine. So if I said that and I offended any of you, I'm sorry. That was not my intent. I'm speaking from my heart, which is the only way I know how to speak now. So I have literally gone from a person who only spoke from his mind, who seemed mechanical and rigid, even to myself, to a person who now almost always speaks from my heart. Almost always. Obviously, I can speak from my mind as well. I mean, I was a professor, so I had to speak from my mind. But when I'm having individual conversations with people, the path of least resistance for me is to speak from my heart. It always is now, and it never was before. And I wish from the bottom of my heart that all of those autistics who have never experienced intersubjectivity, empathy, or as it is technically called, theory of mind, I wish that they would experience it for themselves. My only explanation for why there is even a neurodiversity movement is because those people have never experienced intersubjectivity or empathy or theory of mind. Because I can only believe that if they did, the neurodiversity movement would collapse. There would simply be no more anti-cure people. All the individuals who now identify with it, which surprising to me sometimes is not only the autistics, but the parents of autistics. And I have known some of those parents. And those parents, the ones I spoke with, were not autistic. I assume they knew what empathy was, what heartfulness was, what theory of mind was, what intersubjectivity was. And yet they were willing to set it aside, I guess, to bracket it and begin believing that their children or child who was experiencing, I would say with apologies, suffering with autism should be left alone and should not be cured. And there are many parents who would fall under that category. Too many parents who would fall under that category. And so, let me turn to the Gazans. I've only known one, as I've mentioned before, as far as I know. I've only known one, my former dentist when I lived in Kansas, a wonderful woman with a tremendous heart who liked me, which takes a lot. Obviously, I'm joking, but who deeply loved her son, who quit her job as a professor of dentistry to take care of her son, and who got a job initially working for another dentist in a dentist's office, where she was making nowhere near the amounts of money as she was making as a professor of dentistry. I know because she told me. And then she took the ultimate risk. She quit her job and opened up her own office. And wouldn't you know it, Right after she did that came COVID. And all these orders that were produced by state and local government officials saying that her office needed to remain closed. So for months and months, her dental office was closed, which means she literally was not making any money. I prayed for her. Somehow she managed to survive. She must have had some income in reserve, I imagine. And now she is doing very well. Her practice has become large, and she has a huge number of patients. Initially, that kind of surprised me because she is a Palestinian and she wears a hijab. And I would have thought that, especially in Kansas, which is the Bible Belt, even though we were in Metro Kansas City, which is not like being in a small town in Kansas or a small town in any Midwestern or Southern state, still, it was a relatively conservative area, relatively conservative. And so I was amazed at how many people kept on coming back to her. And I realized that they were coming back to her because of her, because of the kind of person that she was. I must say that one of the hesitations I had in moving from Olathe, Kansas to Mission, Texas, was not seeing her again. I mean, it didn't stop me from moving, but it certainly was a factor that led to my considering whether I should do it. I do miss her. I loved her and still love her. And I hope that she is doing well. And so, there is one Gazan that I had practiced intersubjectivity with. Now, was it necessary for me to bracket parts of her being that might have been disconcerting to me? No, not for me, because I love and have loved Palestinians for a long time. So there was no necessity for me to have to focus on bracketing. There was nothing to bracket. Anything that I would bracket, I loved about her. But that is not always true. And so I am mentioning bracketing in case there are any viewers who might have some prejudices. I hope not, but I have no idea who's watching me. Some prejudices against Palestinians. That it is important to bracket that the person is a Palestinian. Bracket that the people in Gaza are Palestinians. Even bracket that they are in Gaza. Think of them as beings with hearts and with minds, just like yourself. And connect with them meditatively. What I mean by that is to reflect on them. That may sound odd, but what I mean by that is we all reflect on things all the time. But usually we reflect on topics like something in the news, for example. We don't usually, at least consciously, reflect on people. Now we do reflect on people, but we don't ordinarily think of it as reflection. What I am suggesting is that we do think of it as reflection. That after bracketing, if that is necessary, any aspects of that Gazan, that Palestinian, that you may not like, that you may find to be undesirable, that you engage fully with the heart and the mind of that person and relate to that person only as a being with a heart and a mind. And then, as Edmund Husserl said, you will understand who that person or who those people truly are. Otherwise, you will simply see the externalities, and externalities are not a good measure for anyone because we are not external beings. We are beings of the heart, of the mind. The deeper you go into somebody, the closer you get to that person's essence, to that person's, using a fancy philosophical term, quiddity, which means basically essence, the real core of who that person is about. It is difficult really to go much beyond what I've already said, because I think that intersubjectivity is something one learns by doing it. Bracketing too is something one learns by doing it. All I have said to you is words. I can't demonstrate bracketing. I can't demonstrate intersubjectivity because it is something that takes place in my mind and in my heart. I can only talk about it. And talking about it is not the same as doing it. So my suggestion is that as a kind of praxis, which is why Roy Bhaskar adopted it and made it a part of his critical realism. So when I do intersubjectivity, not only am I thinking of phenomenology as developed by Edmund Husserl, I am also thinking of critical realism as developed by Roy Bhaskar. So I am doing both. I am both a phenomenologist and a critical realist. And together, they bring me nothing but joy. Nothing but joy. To Roy, by practicing what he called phenomenological analysis, although he did not coin that term, I prefer just to say phenomenology. One is, in reality, relating with the only part of an individual that truly matters. That truly matters in a kind of ultimate way. So, reflect, or if you wish to call it, meditate or contemplate on a Gazan or Gazans, especially now with all that is happening in that place. And hopefully, by doing that, by connecting with the hearts and minds of Gazans, you will feel a connection to them that you have never felt before. And it's very easy. It's not a hard thing to do. It may be a new thing to do, but hard, no. It's not hard. I've never met anyone whom I explained bracketing and intersubjectivity to who found it to be hard. Not hard. It's just different. But it's different and enlightening. And by intersubjectively connecting with that other person, you are also discovering yourself, because you are establishing a mutual relationship. And so that person is reflected in you, just as you are reflected in them. In my opinion, that is extremely important to consider. Phenomenology is a wonderful praxis, or practice, if you prefer. It is an activity which can transform the practitioner. I know that when I have done it, it has transformed me. And I do it much of the time. I should do it more. I try to do it more, but there are always the inevitable distractions which take me off course. And I sometimes have to remind myself of what I am here for, or of what I want to be here for, which is to connect with Gazans right now, to connect with everyone, but right now, to connect with Gazans. They are deserving of being connected with. They really are. And by bracketing, if you had any negative feelings about Gazans, those negative feelings will simply melt away, especially as you begin the process of intersubjectivity. What I would suggest as perhaps a way to begin this practice is to go onto YouTube and do a search under Gazan or Gazans, or maybe even Gaza, and try to listen to Gazans as they speak. If possible, find some that speak your own language. If you speak Arabic, so much the better. But if not, find some that speak your own language, presumably English, and listen to that person talk. One of the best ways to connect intersubjectively with people is by having an image of that person, then bracketing the image and only focusing on that person's heart and mind. It's hard to intersubjectively connect with people that one has never known. So YouTube, Twitch, whatever, may be good platforms to meet Gazans. And there are a lot of videos on them now because of the ongoing war. So it won't be hard to find some, including those who speak in English, because many Gazans do. Palestinians, by necessity, typically speak both Arabic and Hebrew, but some also speak English. And That is a way of connecting with them in your own language. But then forget that. Forget the language. So use it as a tool to connect with the person, but then bracket it and then connect with that person's heart. Again, I can't explain it better than that. It is something which truly needs to be experienced. Explaining it is okay, but it's no substitute for direct experience. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.